Okay, let's find out how smart Chat GPT is on or in the land business. I'm going to start with a question like how do you sell land without using a title company? Now, the reason for this is because on some really inexpensive pieces of land, it doesn't really pay to, or even kind of work out to go through a title company for anybody involved. Now, I can't ever advise anybody to do that, but the fact is, you don't have a choice. I mean, you have a choice. You can just not buy land, but people want to buy land and they're willing to buy it without that. Let's see what it says. In order to buy land with a title company, you need to handle transfer ownership. It can be complex and may involve several steps. Research the property to ensure that it can be sold, that you have the legal right to it. So establishing who owns the property, that's true. Gather all necessary documents such as deed, survey, and any other relevant documents. Good. And sometimes they have a survey, sometimes they don't. Okay, most of the time they won't. And we have other ways of getting those, plats and stuff like that online. Finding a buyer and negotiating a purchase price. Oh, I love this. It's almost sets up a flip scenario where you locate the land and then, well, you could twist this. This really is talking about how you could sell your own land, but we do this in a twist, right, for flipping, where we actually line up the buyer anyway, negotiate the purchase price. Um, Drafting a sales contract, outlining the terms of sale, including purchase contingencies and other relevant details. That might even include seller financing, so there's other things here to observe. Obtain any necessary permits and approval from authorities such as building or zoning permits. Okay, so that might come in. That's not doesn't really apply to land so much, but if you're going to do anything on the land, which we're just trying to flip it, so we're not building on it. But yeah, if you were going to put something on the land, then of course you would get permits, and you could go to the permit office for that. Um, but let's see how smart they are. How do I get a permit? Let's try that. How do I get a permit to build on land? Let's see how simple we can get with the question. And transfer it such as deed or transfer of title. That's true too. So once the paperwork is transferred, it doesn't really tell you what paperwork here, so we could probably drill down on that too. To get a permit, research the local zoning construction. Probably not really something you have to do, but obtain a copy of the land's plat survey. Determine the land surveyed by public utilities service. Maybe arrange services installed before you can obtain a building permit. Contact the local building department to determine what permits you need. Obtain for your construction project. Exactly true. This may include building permits, electric permits, plumbing, and other mechanical, depending on the scope of the project. Very true. Submit the necessary application and document to the building department within required fees. Exactly. This may include any building plans. Now, we never really do this as land flippers, but this is, what, when we sell something to another person, it's good for you to know this because this is the process, right, of how they go about building a home, putting a mobile home on the property, constructing anything really, drilling a well, whatever. All of that has to be uh, permitted, and usually the contractors you're using will handle the permitting for you, but you can also do it yourself, maybe save a little bit of money. Wait for the building department to review the application and issue the necessary permits. Very true. Several weeks or months, depending on the complexity. True. Okay. Very smart. Very smart. So let's go back into the actual transfer because we were talking about transferring ownership. How do I transfer ownership? Now, I should remember we're talking about land. How do I because that's the way it has a memory built into the system. How do I transfer ownership? Um, let's see just how overview we can kind of get it. This would never work if like in a Google search. Yeah, see, so it's really already knowing what we're talking about. Transferring ownership of property. Could have been ownership of a car, could have been ownership of anything. That's what makes this thing kind of unique um, and easier to use. Identify the property to be transferred, determine the value, uh, typically involved obtaining an appraisal, determine the transfer method, several ways of transferring it, gift, inheritance, or transfer, part of divorce or legal separation. So, true, and again, this, although we deal with these issues, they're usually already settled by the time we get there. All right, so that's really not an issue. Gather all necessary documentation, including a deed, title, or other ownership, as well as any other relevant document, such as a sale gift. Okay, that's really not needed either. Will examine that ourselves um, online. Transfer the ownership of the property. This may involve, here it is, executing a deed or other legal document, paying any necessary fees or taxes. True. And in some states, you'll pay some transfer fees. There's only a few that where you have to pay that tax, but others there isn't a tax. There's just a filing fee. Usually, it's $25 or whatever. And filing the necessary paperwork with the appropriate government agency, which will be the county clerk for the most part. Um, well, for all parts, really. Record the transfer of ownership. In most cases, transfer of ownership must be recorded. And the kind of recycling here. This may involve filing a copy of the deed or other transfer with the county clerk. Oh, there it is. They nailed it. Or other appropriate office. Now, this is still true of other appropriate office, but showing you how smart this is. So, like, if there was something up here where they're talking about, say, a divorce proceeding, well, there, or a will, like inheritance. Well, some of this may be involved, or it will be actually noted in the probate department stuff. We really never get that far, or have to go to those links, but this is just showing you that this is really picking up some good information. If anything, it's overkill. So the simplicity of this could probably all narrowed down to, hey, drop a deed and file that at the county clerk. Boom, done. So it does go into quite a bit. Kind of impressed at this point. Let's go into some maybe common questions. Sometimes we do owner financing and there's an existing mortgage on a property. Let's ask if that's legal. Is it legal to sell a property if it has an existing mortgage on it? Yes, it is legal to sell a property even if it has a legal. However, the sale of the property will typically involve some additional considerations. Okay, if you're the owner, you want to sell it. Well, it still has a mortgage on it. You will need to pay off the mortgage in full or arrange for the buyer to assume the mortgage. In some cases, the lender may allow the buyer to assume the mortgage, but this will depend on the terms of the mortgage and buyer condition. Now, legally, this is all correct, but most lenders, they just simply don't care. If you are unable to pay off the mortgage arranged by it, you will need to obtain the lender's permission to sell the property. In most cases, the lender will require you sell the property for at least the amount of outstanding mortgage. Well, of course, that makes sense. It's also important to note that selling a property with an agreement may have tax implications. That's true. That's a good memory jog there for people to understand. It's one of the selling points that we can use when we're actually discussing owner financing with buyers. You may need to pay capital gains tax on profit you make from the sale, and you may be responsible for paying any taxes or fees associated with the transfer of ownership. All good information. Um, this is really discussing the do on sell clause. Is really what this is discussing. But interesting that this capital it brings in the capital gains here. Let's kind of boil down to if we're talking to a seller and we want to bring up capital gains as a selling point, how would that benefit? Um, how does a seller benefit from selling with owner financing in regards to capital gains? Now that's kind of convoluted, so let's see if I could actually pull that apart because it could tell you a lot. This is be interesting to find out. Selling property with owner financing can offer several benefits for the seller, including potential reduction in capital gains liability. When you sell property for profit, you may be required to pay capital gains on the taxes. The amount of taxes will depend on the tax rate, how long you held the property. Exactly true. So anything over a year, they will basically be able to file it using a capital gains format. Anything if they've held it for less than a year, they're going to get full income on it, just ordinary income tax, which is horrible for them. So splitting that up, especially if they've held it for less than a year, is a good idea. But even still, your capital gains will fall under several categories from there. By offering owner financing, the seller can potentially spread out the profit for the seller over a longer period of time, which may result in a lower overall tax liability. Instead of receiving the entire purchase price up front, the seller receives the purchase price in installments, typically over a period of several years. This allows the seller to report the income from the sale of the tax return in smaller amounts each year, which may result in a lower tax rate. Not only will it reduce the tax rate, or could reduce it. It could eliminate it because if the payment is small enough, it can be covered by their uh, standard deductions, and um, it could maybe not even come up as something that they have to pay tax on at all. So uh, generally, when you start looking at stuff where they're pulling in less than say 40 some odd thousand a year, it can actually disappear. So just a big deal on that. I wonder how deep this would go. Um, I guess you could form some questions to figure that out. I'm just trying to think of off the top of my head what that would be. Let's see. How much capital gains taxes would one pay when selling a property after 1 year of ownership? Okay, I guess that's one way of putting it. Let's see what it says. Okay, depends on several factors. Yeah, okay, so yeah, you need to know your tax bracket. If you held the property for more than 1 year, consider short-term capital gains. Tax at your ordinary rate. True. This means if you're on higher tax bracket, you may take higher tax rate on property held for less than 1 year. If you have the property for 1 year or longer, selling it for a profit you make from the sale is considered long-term capital gains. Exactly true. And it's taxed at a lower rate than short-term capital gains. The current long-term capital gain rates are 0, 15, and 20, depending on your tax bracket. To calculate the amount of capital gain tax you would owe on a property you sold after 1 year, you will need to determine the profit you made from the sale, apply the proper tax rate, and it's going to consult a professional. All very true. So that gives you a pretty good review of that. So yeah, there's a lot you can do with this. I did some. I actually created a cheat sheet for creating an affidavit of heirship using this system right here, which was very accurate and it's extremely good. So you could do things like put in a sales contract and then ask it to summarize the key points of the contract, for example. It can do stuff like that, or the information in the contract. There's so it's interesting where how far it can go. I wonder. Um, let's just put in a um, let's ask it to create a sales contract for a unimproved property. Let's see. Let's see if it can create a sales contract. What that would look like. So here's a template for a sales contract. Okay, that's good. Description of property. Yep, you need a legal address. Purchase price of the property. True. Down payment financing. Good. Closing date for the transaction. Good. Property being sold as is. Good. Contract shall be binding. Benefit of the parties. Assessors. Well, that's where it kind of falls apart. All right. So even though this is a legal contract and it could be signed and it would work, there's still definitely some more parts to a sales contract that you need to be safe. To be safe going in, buying or selling um, between parties. This would not be it. Uh, Ironically, this obviously it's taking some basics from something online that it's found some basic stuff. But let's see if we can expand it. Expand this contract for more detail clauses. It's a statement. Let's see what it is. Description, purchase price, financing terms. So far, it's the same. Closing, same. As is condition. Here's adding the closing costs are covered. Escrow, sellers responsible for paying property taxes. Good. If the buyer defaults on contract, that's good. Liquidated damages, contract shall bind. Okay, so it can expand. So you could probably continue, pushing it to kind of see the scope of where it might go. But very interesting that, I mean, I like the fact that it kind of remembers what it did before and it can expand on it with a simple request. That's kind of incredible. This is truly very, very interesting. Um, this AI can certainly change, I think, the way we interact on not only on computers, but um, probably in a lot of other ways. Uh, this is scary exciting, because there is a point to AI that could disrupt a lot of what we call normal, but what doesn't, right? What doesn't disrupt? Everything is about disruption. And the people who are content with not wanting change and they like to live their life and their job is based upon things that don't change will be scared, of stuff like this, or actually they should be scared because this kind of stuff is what takes their jobs away, even though it opens up other jobs, obviously. But why we should all be constantly learning, why we should all be constantly looking at what is going on right now that it is potentially a disruptor to whatever we're doing. All right, so one of the ways that I know I've capitalized over the years is by finding what is a cutting edge thing happening right now and just learning it. You just get in and you learn it. There's always a learning curve to it. It takes a while to figure it out, but when you do, it puts you miles ahead of your competition because most of your competition will not do that. They just won't. It takes them years sometimes to catch up. In the meantime, you're years ahead of your competition. Interesting. We'll see where this leads. Have a good day, everybody.